Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I am Rocco Rossi, and I have the great honor of being the president and CEO of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. We have an amazing session for you today. But first, since we've been spending all of this time in virtual space, it's always important to reconnect to the ground, reconnect to the land. And for myself, I sit here on the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewa, the Wendat, and the Anishinaabe people, and of course, many other First Nations and Métis people since time immemorial. We also meet on the National Day of Mourning. This is of particular significance to me and always mark it because when I was a youngster, I lost one of my uncles on a construction site. He was only 22 years old. He'd barely been in the country for 6 months, seeking a better life for himself and his family, and we lost him way too soon. We're gathered today to talk about skills, and we're in the midst of this pandemic, and so people often say, well, you know, there's so much unemployment, no problem, but of course not all industries are going to be coming back at the same pace in the same way. So much has changed from the standpoint of use of the internet. People's e-commerce plans went from 2 to 3 years to 2 to 3 weeks to survive. How has that affected things? And of course, we've had this massive federal budget announced with all kinds of investments in the area of skills. And we particularly focus and have concerns for the SME sector because unlike the larger organizations that have HR, that have capacity in terms of training, retraining, most SMEs don't have that capacity to build capacity. And so much more important that you have policies and structures in place to be able to maximize that opportunity for businesses and for employers. And we couldn't do this with better partners. We're delighted to work yet again with the Diversity Institute, with the Future Skills Center. And of course, at the Diversity Institute is our partner and inspirer and champion on so many issues with respect to skills development, to inclusion, and building a more productive and inclusive society, Dr. Wendy Tsukier. Over to you to kick us off, Wendy.
Thanks so much, and it's yet again a pleasure to be here. I'm sure some people are tired of hearing us talk about the importance of innovation and inclusion as we rebuild. And I'm delighted that we've got a great panel here, and my fearless leader, Pedro Barada, is also here from the Future Skills Center. But what I wanted to do first off is just to level set a little bit by talking about some of the research that we've been doing through the Future Skills Center, because I think it helps set the groundwork for our discussion today. And I apologize, some of you may have heard some of this before, but I think a lot of it bears repeating. And especially given we're absolutely thrilled with some of the announcements that came out in the budget. Much of that was a function of advocacy by organizations like the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. So where I want to start is just by reminding people of some of the core issues when we look at SMEs and skills. SMEs are often not at the table in the discussions of skills. Many of the organizations that have been driving the skills agenda are large corporations, banks, IT companies, and so on, even though SMEs account for 90% of employment in Canada. And because we lead the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, we're particularly concerned about the impact of COVID on small businesses and on entrepreneurs, and the role that skills will play in rebuilding. Again, just to reiterate, and I'm really thrilled that JP is here because he can give us a deep dive into manufacturing. We have to think about skills from a sectoral perspective. So size of companies is important, stage of development is important, but there are huge differences between SMEs, for example, in the tech sector, and SMEs in accommodation, food services, and so on. And we've been trying to track the ups and the downs. The other thing that's important to remember is within individual sectors, there are big differences. So while transportation and warehousing, if you look at the airlines, have been hammered, logistics and distribution have actually grown as a result of COVID. And as I've said, many of you have heard before, if we compare women-led businesses to the average, they have lost more revenue and been harder hit than others, partly because of the sectors they're in, partly because they're underfinanced and new, and partly because of the crushing burden of childcare. And Rocco is my hero because he was one of the first business leaders to stand up after COVID and say, childcare is not a women's issue, it's an economic issue. We also know that specific populations within the SME community are particularly hard hit. And the Canadian, the Black Business Professional Association did a comparison of its members and the Canadian Federation of Independent Business members in terms of impact of COVID. And on every single metric, they were twice as hard hit and half as likely to have received support. So whether we're looking about being worried about permanent closure or uncertain that they will reopen, unable to survive a month, twice as hard hit. And so we were really pleased that we saw in the budget investments specifically targeting women, Black entrepreneurs, and Indigenous entrepreneurs as well. We've also talked about the fact that in addition to destroying lives and businesses, COVID has accelerated innovation in a number of ways. And remember, innovation is not just about new technology, it's about doing things differently. And we've seen this right across sectors, large and small. The story of Shopify is one of the most interesting because Shopify grew not because it discovered some new technology or patents. Shopify grew because small businesses had to very quickly digitize, and they adopted its platform. And that's a theme that you've heard me talk about before. Technology adoption is just as important as technology creation. And again, there are significant investments in the budget to support this. And it's no surprise to you that the number of transactions that have gone digital has dramatically increased globally because of COVID. I was thinking about the other day, in the last year, I have touched one $20 bill. I have not used cash at all. And I don't think that I am atypical. We know that businesses have made dramatic changes, and there are differences between micro businesses and other small businesses. They've changed the way they serve customers. They've changed their productions. They've temporarily closed, but many of them have innovated and are surviving. And we also know there's been a huge transition to distributed work and telecommuting. So recently, and Simon will talk more about this because he's been involved with the Future Skills Center, undertaken a survey of SMEs. Tanya Sabat, the University of Montreal, led this work. And what's interesting is we knew prior to COVID, there were skill shortages, and small businesses talked about not having the people that they needed. That hasn't changed that much. Well over a third still talk about having a shortage of skilled workers. They talk about having changed their organizational practices. 71% say that they've had trouble recruiting in certain areas. So the skills gap, in spite of COVID, as Rocco said, has continued to be a problem. And when we look at the extent to which SMEs feel that their current employees have the skills that they need, it's kind of interesting that on balance, less than half of them said on a 10-point scale, we have the skills that we need. I would say 7 to 10 indicates a yes. Anything below that indicates there are problems. We also know that SMEs have more trouble in finding skills. They don't have the same flexibility that large corporations have. For example, as Rocco said, to invest in reskilling or even to look for new talent pools. And so we've been doing consultations with OCC members, with other SMEs across the country, with women-led businesses, Black-led businesses, Indigenous businesses, and so on. And I wanted to just quickly highlight some of the things that we've heard. One of the things that we've certainly observed is there isn't a common language for skills. Even though we say skills is the currency of the 21st century, we don't always mean the same thing when we say communication skills or digital skills. And here's a good example some of you have seen before. Look at vicinity job data and the jobs that are posted. And the OECD said, oh, digital skills are what's most in demand in Ontario. But break that down. Only 10% is for programmers. 75% of corporations, when they companies, when they say they want digital skills, want people who can work with Excel. So we have to be really precise about our language. We have to recognize that managerial and entrepreneurial skills, the whole gamut, critically important for entrepreneurs and managers of SMEs more than ever before. And we see real gaps, for example, in knowledge of how technology can be used or financing skills in a lot of startups, especially those run by women and others. The demand for skilled trades is unrelenting, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that. We have to challenge some of the stereotypes. You do a Google search on carpenter, for example, you will get pictures of Jesus, Karen Carpenter, who old people like me will remember, and carpenter ants before you will see a picture of a woman. And some of these stereotypes about who's in the trades, who belongs, trades are dirty, trades don't pay well, are completely at odds with reality. We have to work at new approaches to skilled trades. And some of that includes ensuring that internationally educated tradespeople can quickly transition into jobs in Canada. We also heard, ironically, that even though a lot of the low skill jobs are disappearing and were the most disrupted by COVID, that some SMEs can't actually find low skill workers. And there's been some talk among in some quarters about the fact that some of the COVID recovery packages actually discouraged many from taking minimum wage jobs, for example. And in some communities, that's become a real skills problem. We also know that fundamental skills, the boring reading, writing, arithmetic kinds of skills, which ESDC refers to as skills for success, along with digital skills and emotional intelligence and so on, remain really important, and we need to invest in those. And we know there's lots of really interesting innovation going on, new technologies being available for upskilling, reskilling, and to support matching of companies with job seekers. And we've worked on a lot of projects, most recently with Deloitte, trying to catalog some of these opportunities. A lot of them only work for large corporations because of the investments that are required in terms of time and money. But there's a huge opportunity for organizations like the Ontario Chamber of Commerce to pull together a variety of companies with similar needs and to develop shared platforms, shared resources, and build those economies of scale that the typical SME does not have. We also have to remember not all innovation is technological. We heard from SMEs that had done really interesting things to attract workers, from providing wraparound services, housing, language training, community supports, and so on. Many, many other innovations. And we're trying to catalog those and to share them so that people can learn from one another. And you'll see more on that, I think, soon. But we were thrilled that the budget, for example, is providing more funding for people not just to come and tell you what to do with your technologies, but to actually come into the organizations and set those technologies up to help SMEs and entrepreneurs continue to innovate with technology. So from our perspective, you know, the skills agenda for SMEs is not simple, it's multi-layered, and we're really pleased to be working with the OCC and others to move this forward. Recognizing sectors are different, sizes are different, regions are different, and there are diversity issues that have to be addressed. Understanding that technology adoption is what drives innovation, not the making of technology. And we saw that transition with COVID really accelerated what normally would happen over years into a matter of months. It wasn't about new IP. It wasn't about new discoveries. It was about getting people to do things differently. We know that SMEs need more support, as Rocco mentioned, with respect to their HR practices, with respect to diversity and inclusion, to understand that there are new pools of employees that they can tap into. And the OCC's really led the way with things like discoverability, but there are lots of opportunities to tap more into newcomers and other talent pools. And I won't go on and on. I'll just emphasize the final point. I think we're poised to really be able to make a difference with SMEs, with entrepreneurs, if we think collectively about what the strategy is moving forward. Thank you so much. And now we will shift gears and move over to the panel. So I'd like my panelists to all turn on their cameras so we can see you. And I'll start briefly introducing each one. They can wave at you. So Simon Blanchette is a research associate with Diversity Institute and has been the lead author on a number of our research projects for the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, as well as for the Future Skills Center. And he'll talk more about his recent research. Jean-Pierre Giroux is the president of Excellence in Manufacturing Consortium, and it represents the manufacturing sector, but really has embraced innovation in many ways and early on recognized the importance of skills as a competitive advantage. He began as an economic development officer in Canada's capital region and has spent the last 15 years developing innovative workplaces for the Canadian manufacturing sector. And last but not least is my new and bestest friend, Rakesh Naidu, who many of you know. He's the president and the CEO of the Windsor-Essex Regional Chamber of Commerce. And he's responsible for initiating and executing the Chamber's strategy to build economic prosperity in the region. He works across sectors. He's an incredible innovator, and I know you'll be very interested in what he has to say. So without further ado, I'll open it up maybe.
Rakesh, just to be clear, she used to say that about me, so she's very fickle.
Yes, yes, I have a short attention span. But I wonder if maybe before I dive into the questions, if each one of you just wants to provide a quick perspective on your view of why the skills agenda is important for SMEs. And I'll start off with you, Simon, because your research is kind of fresh off the block.
Definitely. Thank you, Wendy. Well, it's important because when we think of SMEs, and you mentioned it, they are the backbone of the Canadian economy. And for them to be able to thrive, they need to be able to find and attract the talent that they need. And that will lead to more innovation, more growth, more creativity. So without that, we won't be able to kind of harness all of the potential that we have in all of our SMEs in Canada. So I think that's summarized quickly, but pretty importantly, why skills and competencies are so important for SMEs.
And I think your research really confirms that in spite of, as Rocco said, in spite of the fact that many people assume that talent isn't an issue because of underemployment, it still is. So I thought it was really interesting work. JP, how about you?
Same thing, Wendy. I mean, if you look at manufacturing, it is a world of SMEs, small and medium-sized business. And let me just qualify, it's close to 97% of our sector, over 40,000 firms. I would probably think, looking at the numbers, that maybe 2,000 to 3,000 firms are over 100 employees, and the rest are all small and medium-sized business. So that's the heart of the issue, and we all know that resources and time is an issue and survival for SMEs. So this is going to be part of my topic later on.
That's great, thanks. And Rakesh, how about you?
Yeah, I think Simon and John covered it really well. It's such a immensely important group that we just cannot overlook. Like 99.8% of the businesses are SMEs in Canada that employ majority of employees. So very, very important from GDP contribution, from employment perspective, from its impact on the social fabric of the country. You think of the various ways in which a business can affect or influence a country, and SMEs are right there on the top in terms of their effect on the business and the community at large. But speaking about Windsor-Essex region specifically, we have close to about 30,000 businesses here, majority of them small businesses, and they play a very key role. And from the chamber perspective, almost 80% of my members are small and medium-sized businesses. So the SMEs are the ones that are actually carrying the heavy load and making things happen. And it'll be a huge disservice if we were not to really address this extremely important sector.
And it's so interesting because I grew up in St. Catharines, a GM town as well. And when we think about Windsor, when we think about St. Catharines, we think about Oshawa, we always think about the auto sector and big operations, lots of unionized jobs. We forget about the multiplier effects and the fact that for every auto sector job, there are about 6 other jobs that are often in either their supply chain or in the services that grow as the big manufacturers grow. So it's so interesting to have that perspective, because when you look at how much we're willing to invest in saving auto workers' jobs relative to investments in SME survival, there's something of a disconnect sometimes. So back to you, JP, maybe you can talk a little bit, and it'll be interesting to see your perspective versus Rakesh's, but based on real world experience, what sorts of things have you seen in terms of the impact of COVID specifically, and what are you observing with respect to skills in among your members?
Right now, just before COVID, if we go back a little bit more than a year, it was #1 issue: labor shortages. Like skills was on the top of the agenda, but in manufacturing, the need to find the labor was #1 by far, and and we had to fight a little bit of the perception of in manufacturing where there's a perception of low pay, low skills, but in reality, when you look at our job, it's a full-time job, benefit, and a lot of perspective for growth. And I speak here in terms of obviously small and medium-sized company. In terms of skills, what we have seen is a push for employability skills here, and I talk about attitude, motivation, personal management of the individual. So we're obviously looking for with people that are has been displaced, who wants to transition back into the sector and give them a chance to land a job. We're still investing and pushing a lot, and we're seeing it with our company on essential skills. And here I'm going back to the key essential skills to succeed in today's world, where problem solving, but it touched also on the literacy suite, reading, writing, basic maths, measurement. Measurement is very important in the world of manufacturing. And as well as talking about collaboration and everything related to working in teams. And as well, I can add to this, because not just the essential skills, but the business skills. There's a big need right now for leadership. And we're seeing it at all levels, not just from the C level, but going down all the level, all the way up to the shop floor workers, where we're asking for leadership, we're asking for creativity, innovation more than ever. Innovation, ability to shift things, to add value, to help to create value in everything we're doing. So these are the type of conversation we're seeing in our world.
And it's so interesting because, you know, you and I are both on the ESDC Essential Skills panel, and they're releasing the new profile. But it sounds like what you see on the ground is exactly consistent with what we're talking about in terms of essential skills as the foundation on which other things are built. Are there any specialized or technical skills that come to mind when you think about things that your members are talking about?
It's when we looked at specialized skills, and I guess we'll get into the digital skills, which is very hot right now. But when it comes to the technical skills, for us in manufacturing is what to function on, and I always look at the common denominator is like when it comes to hydraulics, pneumatics, PLCs, and it gets into electricity, but not necessarily mastering these skills, but understanding the foundation and how they function, and how to know enough in order to call somebody who's an expert in it. And that's something that we are entertaining a conversation and having conversation with our companies, so they can build capacity, internal capacity, so they can actually cover the basic of the 101 of it, and they can have that internal capacity to be able to react on it, and to have the people inside, so they can do the faulting and the diagnostic of it.
Thanks so much. Rakesh, how about you?
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. You know, so you rightly mentioned that even before COVID, workforce shortage was a major issue. We had the same here, just like every other part in Canada. You know, before COVID, the economy was doing very well. You know, it was very robust here in Windsor, Essex, predominantly because of the strong manufacturing sector that we had, and transportation sector and agribusiness sector, which are three of our large sectors, and they were all really doing well. Our unemployment rate was about 5.3, 5.4. So when you have that low unemployment rate, you know, there's definitely a challenge to hire and to really fill gaps in workforce. So that was an issue for every size of business, but particularly for small and medium-sized businesses. And whenever, you know, as the chamber person, we used to have a conversation with our members, this was the #1 topic that was brought up time and again in terms of the challenges, you know, to fill positions and, you know, bring in people. Now, post-COVID, this is clearly, you know, it has got worse. And what is really compounding the issue now is that earlier it was to do with lack of workforce talent. Now there is financial challenges on top of that, layered with the availability challenge. Now, some workers, you rightly pointed out, because, the program, some of the support programs that were offered by the government, didn't really encourage people to go out there and work, especially for some low-paying jobs. So that caused additional concern. And then there were people who were just, worried about going out there and being potentially exposed, or they were taking care of their family members, or they had daycare challenges. So all of that added to the paucity of workforce. Then on top of that is the on and off lockdown conditions that we've had, which makes it very difficult for businesses to plan for their operations. When they start, when they end, which days they open, which days they close, all of that is very difficult to predict in the current situation that we are in. And that makes it very difficult for them to, to then address the staffing levels and the challenges that this on and off condition imposes. And then on top of that, there is the shortages because of supply chain issues, right? So businesses are having to face all of these challenges and yet maintain a workforce that can, provide the necessary help and support they need to keep the operations open. The result is that they are just not, they are just not on top of making the workforce availability happen in time. And that creates a lot of challenges for hiring and for SMEs to sustain their operation. Now, in terms of the skills and talents that is required in, pandemic and post-pandemic times, JP rightly mentioned, it is the need for digital skills that is really, really right on the top. But the ability for SMEs to be flexible and nimble is actually the most at this point of time. So how can businesses pivot? How can businesses adopt technology? And technology adoption is, everyone's talking about that. Yes, we need to really bring in tools. We need to, to bring in technology, and we need to be on the web. We should have e-commerce platform. But, the success of that depends on how well we do it. It's not the tools, it's not the technology, it is how well we use them. And many SMEs fail or struggle in that area because, one, there can be a technology mismatch. They may not necessarily need the tool, or maybe it's a tool which is over-designed or under-designed for their purposes, so that creates a challenge. So those are things that needs to be looked into. And in terms of the skills that are needed to survive at this time, again, JP and you rightly mentioned that it's not all about specialized skill or technical skills. There is a need for many basic skills, and that's been very clearly identified. I'll just share this number with you that in the month of March, over 4,600 jobs were posted on the workforce board in the Windsor-Essex area. Of that, about 3,100 were new jobs. So kind of a sign that if the economy is allowed to open, then there will be quite a bit of demand. Now, when you look at these jobs, about the 4,600 jobs, almost 50% of these jobs involved skill sets that were customer service related, communication, problem solving, time management, attention to details, sales, interpersonal skills. Those were some of the skills that were identified, not so much in terms of, whether you had the Java ability or the C++ ability or not. These were the skills, 50%, over 50%. So just, underlines the importance of these basic skills and the need for having these basic skills. One thing also very important and perhaps unique to Windsor-Essex area is that many of these jobs had driving abilities as one of the requirements. And I think that is in line with what we're seeing in terms of growth in the logistics and transportation sector. Quite a few of those jobs identified driving as a requirement.
And thanks for, I sound like a broken record, I know, but thanks for bringing up the issue about sales, because even we've done research on artificial intelligence and the jobs needed for artificial intelligence. And of course, you need the PhDs with machine learning. And of course, you need the co-op engineering grads from Waterloo, and everyone's fighting over them. But some of the biggest gaps they have in the in companies that are developing artificial intelligence products, project management, sales, marketing. Because Because at the end of the day, you need the people who make the technology, but typically they can't deal with humans on the other end. They're often not very good at explaining what the technology can do to advance a particular organization's business goals. And that's what especially small businesses need. They don't need to have, I don't need to know how my internal combustion engine works, to drive a car. And in the same way, I think our innovation agenda often gets so wrapped up with the people who are making the technology. It really historically hasn't paid enough attention to how we actually get people to use the technology. And that's where you get the innovation. So, even the head of Microsoft, Kevin Cukier, is always talking about the importance of sales and marketing skills in the tech sector. And I think we have to say that over and over and over again, so people understand that there are so many different pathways and opportunities to move into really well-paid tech jobs, leveraging things like interpersonal skills and sales skills and negotiation skills and so on. Sometimes the tech is the easiest part of the job. It's those other things that are way harder to develop. So thank you for raising that. Simon, over to you. Maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the things you observed in the research.
Definitely, and I think that's a good point to build on, because one of the overwhelming sought after skills that we're seeing based on the survey results, based on the focus group results, is an emphasis on soft skills. It's good to have, if we look at the last decade, so much has been said about, hard skills, about coding, about data, and so on. But these are the jobs that will be most likely and more quickly digitized, because you can turn that to programming. But soft skills, so collaboration, for example, I think is the one that was more often ranked as 10 out of 10 in terms of importance by respondents surveying the focus groups, because you cannot make that happen through machine. And going back when we were talking about, having those resources, well, the way you turn resources into a competitive advantage is by organizing around them. But that also happens through organization, through actually using your talent efficiently and better than your competitor. And it's also something that kind of came up into the focus group result. And on a positive note, I guess the shift to telework that we've seen with the pandemic means that you can actually recruit more widely in terms of talent. But it also means that it's harder to retain people, because people now can actually work anywhere. So it does bring new challenges from management, because you need to be able to build loyalty in terms of your employees, even though they're working remotely. So you need to have more skills in terms of like supporting, developing, onboarding, and ways to bring your new employees working remotely into the culture, which is more challenging. But these are all softer skills that you need to be developing. So again, we talk about sales, about selling a tech product, but selling your culture to new employees is also important. Why should you be working for us when now from home you can pretty much work for any organization? So that's a really important aspect. And as well, balancing the managing people remotely, but also not micromanaging them, and also respecting that privacy, because one of the things that we've seen is more blurry boundaries between work life and personal life now that you're pretty much all working from home as well.
No, I think those are really good points. And I, even with my own team, I think I have 20 new people that I've never actually met face to face. In fact, there was someone who came on camera for the first time yesterday or the day before, and I realized it was a woman, not a man. So, and they'd been working for me for quite some time, but all I'd seen was their name and emails. So I think you raised a really good point. And not to get ahead of us, but I'm working on a little mini report looking at the impact of innovation. And to your point, Simon, one of the biggest things with COVID and the transition to remote work is that we know a good chunk of employees and employers are not going to return to the old ways, that a portion of employees still want to work remotely. Number of employers are getting rid of their real estate and so on. But managing people in a remote environment, keeping them motivated, understanding whether they're working or not, how to evaluate performance is way, way more complex. And that's another area that I think that is kind of we've underestimated the skills, the leadership skills, the management skills, the interpersonal skills, the processes and systems that we have to put in place to do this more effectively. Because if you think about every aspect of work, there's a piece of it that always relies on interpersonal communications and relationships and unspoken rules and all sorts of things that when you're co-located with people, you can kind of absorb by osmosis. When we're all at the end of a Zoom call, it's way harder, as you said, to build culture, to engage people. And, you know, a lot of managers still worry about what employees are really doing when the camera's not on. Just picking up on management and leadership, and certainly you raised it, JP, and one of the things that Rocco mentioned was that SMEs have skills needs, probably more so than large corporations, but they also lack the resources. They don't typically have an HR department. You know, the same person who orders the toner for the printer is the person who's doing the hiring, is the person who's you know, doing the tax returns. And so the kinds of expensive and sophisticated tools and techniques that a lot of large corporations with formal HR and even you know, diversity officers are able to implement just are not feasible for SMEs. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what you've observed in terms of HR practices, where some of the gaps are, and also what you've seen as kind of innovative approaches. Do you want to talk about that, JP? Because you raised management skills as an issue.
Absolutely. And one of our biggest challenge is to put skills at the top of the agenda, at the business agenda. And that's not an understatement here. And it's true for SMEs. And we're on a mission to make sure, because the first thing we hear is we don't have time. And we get this. It's true more than in any other circumstances with SMEs. They are in a survival mode. They're lean. Resources is a luxury. You mentioned, Wendy, very often and quite the majority of the time, they don't have a dedicated person that look after the skill agenda. They do for HR matters, but not looking at what's the mission or the objective of the skills. So putting it right at in front of the CEO, of the owner or the management is the starting point, and from there designing solution. And that becomes the challenge, like finding the time to organize a skill plan, having the commitment to implement that skills agenda. But that's the number one thing. So you talked about, or you asked about innovative approach. One of the things we're seeing is the notion of mentorship and building a mentorship program when it comes to onboarding, when it comes to developing, and when it comes to retaining the workforce. And that goes along with building internal capacity. And there's a lot of benefit related to this, because first it comes with your own internal people. So whether it's your supervisors, your managers, your first line supervisors that are directly involved in the onboarding process, because there's a lot of we talk a lot about recruiting. We very rarely talk about all the money that companies are throwing away in recruiting people because they're not able to keep the people. Because there's something in manufacturing we call manufacturing quits. So it's one thing to get somebody in, but it's another thing to keep the individual. Often this individual leave after 1, 2, 3 weeks or a few months later on. So this is a repeat process that they have to do, very costly process. So getting and all of this very often is not it's informal, but I think what we're seeing in terms of innovation, Wendy, is to formalize that mentorship and having mentors that are properly trained and understanding their role, and having mentees also and understanding what are the tools that they can use, and what are the practices they can opt to have a better experience and to better understand their career direction, and that will ultimately reduce the retention, or having a better job in retaining our own employees and better engagement at the end.
I'm so glad you mentioned retention, because when it comes, we'll talk more later about diversity issues, but one of the big selling points for discoverability, the OCC's program that's trying to get employers to look more seriously at persons living with disabilities, is the costs of people always think that hiring someone who's disabled is going to cost you more. The evidence, when you actually do the economic analysis, is it costs you less because there are higher retention rates. And so all of the fears and assumptions that often go into hiring people who are different than the people you've always hired are often based on those kind of short-term decisions, like, oh yeah, my friend Joe, who I golf with, knows somebody has a kid looking for a job. Okay, grab them. As opposed to having very systematic processes in place where you think about what the skills are, you look at different pools for those skills instead of always fishing in the same pond, and have a more strategic approach to HR. And it's often sort of penny wise, pound foolish. People move too quickly, and as a result, it ends up costing them far more. How about you, Rakesh? What do you observe in terms of the practices you see with SMEs and HR, and what are some of the things that could be done better?
Yeah, Wendy, so there is a report that it came out recently, and that talked about the cost of HR functions, cost of hiring specifically for SMEs, and what it does in terms of the overall business, and if there is a lot of turnover, what it does to the profitability and the bottom line and the viability of the business. For a lot of small business owners, they spend 40% of their time, of their useful working hours, doing tasks that do not generate any income, such as hiring. And then there's a study that was done by Society for Human Resources Management, and they found out that on an average, it is about $5,100 per hire, and it takes about roughly 42 days to fill a position. So this may be fine for a medium, large size business that has the capacity and the infrastructure, the workforce to do it. But for SMEs, it just, it is very difficult to manage if there is a turnover and with the cost and the timeline that I mentioned. And also what we're seeing, as is rightly pointed out before, is that there is a major shift. There's so much remote work that's happening. And when you have remote work, more of that is going to happen, because more and more we're finding functions such as marketing, sales, accounting, legal, research, HR, all of that can be done remotely. So this would be a time when SMEs would be looking at, okay, you know what, I don't necessarily need to have my workforce, captive workforce in the place where I have the operation. I can have them in maybe some low-cost places, places where the cost of living is low, and I could hire people from those places, because now it's possible to have them remotely available. So that is another really important influencer in terms of how SMEs are approaching hiring. And then on top of that, we have the emergence of gig economy. A lot of gig workers. We have about 1.8 million in Canada, and that's growing. And post-pandemic, there is an estimation that will grow in faster. We have digital nomads, that can be, they're freelancers that can be anywhere doing work for for multiple clients at the same time, hopping from one project to another. So all of that is going to have an influence in terms of whom you hire, when you hire, and how do you hire. And I think that is where innovation in terms of hiring is important. You know, we started off by talking about how for small businesses it is very difficult to hire because one, it is a cost of the overhead. You know, so in some cases, you know, the businesses will like to have a resource, but maybe part-time, maybe just project-specific hiring. They may not necessarily have the wherewithal to, you know, to have a full-time person or full-time, you know, staff. So part-time work, gig work is something that is going to become more and more important, and a lot of SMEs will be looking at using that as an avenue. Now, also when you look at the workforce, I started over mentioning how many people do not necessarily have, you know, all 8 hours that they can provide service. You know, they have their own issues to take care, maybe family. So during the day, they may be available at 2 or 3 hours. There are students that are there that have to go to school and they're available only at some time during the day. So the job seekers, they may be in between jobs, or they may be taking jobs at a particular time, but have certain downtime. And during that downtime, they need to find work. And then there are these SMEs that have a need, you know, which can come up at any time because, you know, let's say there is a huge, well, you know, once we come out of COVID, you know, hopefully a restaurant has a huge order and they have to have 5 people in the kitchen in the next 2 to 3 hours to get it all done for the evening takeout. How can they find people with the right skill set at the right time in a short time? You know, so almost an just in demand kind of a thing, and it is an on demand thing. So that is where, you know, the iWork tool, and I wear the hat as a founder of this social enterprise. We came up with this idea because what we wanted to do is to match the job seekers availability, which is dynamic, and the need of the small business, which is also dynamic. You know, that can change from time to time, that can change based on availability of the workforce or the orders or the business volume and so on, and leverage technology to do all the screening, all the vetting by use of technology, so that you know, 42 hours are not needed to hire someone because it's just impractical. Those days when you can have formal hiring process which goes for that long, those days are gone. We need to be really nimble and flexible. As I started off by saying, that this is where the SMEs can benefit by using a technology platform that does all the screening, the matching using AI and machine learning, identifies the top matches for them, but also more importantly, it doesn't just, you know, matches them based on their skill sets and you know, the other features they have, but also about the availability. You know, their availability is taken into consideration. So now when a small business is in the need of someone urgently, they know that that person exists with the right skill sets that they need and is available for the time they need it. So that's really where, you know, the iWork platform that we came up has become very important and very useful for a lot of businesses. And, you know, the other thing is that with times, we have to really be very, very nimble. As I mentioned, that if you find someone, you have to have the ability to do an instant, you know, interview with them. You have to have the ability to bring them on board instantly, you know, and maybe there is a need for them to be trained on a certain very specific policy of that company before that person comes on board. Maybe there is a need for them to watch a video that educates them on where they're going to work and what they're expected to do. So a whole learning management system also is needed to be brought in tandem with a hiring platform. So that's where what we did is we created these 2 additional features where you can do instant video calls and interviews and get everything done right at that spot, at that instant. But also the learning management system is available so that, you know, learning can be done at, you know, at their own pace, and company specific information can be brought up frequently, you know, as in when a company, small business says, oh, you know what, I would like my hiree, or I would like my existing employee to be trained on this new thing, or they should be equipped to do this. They can quickly use the LMS platform and train them. So it's on the job training, but it is using the virtual platform. And it is also helpful for those that are remotely dispersed, or they're dispersed in different places. Micro credentials is possible through that. Job specific training is possible through that. Rating on skills is possible through that, so that, you know, the the digital nomads or the gig workers can be evaluated properly, and there's a proper feedback on their competencies, their quality of work, their professionalism. All of that is possible on a platform. And that kind of innovation can be very useful for small and medium-sized businesses.
You know, I'm going to interject here because I'm really glad you talked about iWork. And my understanding is it's a social enterprise, right? Like you're not
Absolutely
making tons of money. This is something that is designed for community good. And I know you've been talking to Mark Patterson at Magnet. And Magnet, for those of you who don't know, is a social enterprise that was formed with between Ryerson and the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. And it's also the platform that underpins, it's basically the infrastructure for the Future Skills Center, helps match job seekers and employers. But if Mark were here, he would say that their aspiration is not to dominate the market. Their aspiration is to reduce the fragmentation and connect things together, connect the pieces together. And I'm sort of jumping ahead to kind of questions and comments I had later on, but in my mind, at least, one of the disadvantages that SMEs have is lack of scale, lack of resources. And if we can really focus our attention, and this is part of what we're hoping to do, working with the Ontario Chamber of Commerce and individual chambers, but if we can focus our attention on where the opportunities are for shared infrastructure, for curated resources, like why would everybody be developing their own unique financial literacy or management 101 kinds of programs? And, you know, with some of the micro-credentials, as Rocco mentioned, and free online learning and eCampus Ontario and others who are trying to build shared resources, I think the chambers in particular, and, you know, Excellence in Manufacturing Consortium, I'm counting you in this when I say this, business networks, shall we say, are one of the ways that we can build critical mass, economies of scale, improve efficiency, and reduce fragmentation. And what we need to do, in my view, is have a better mechanism for sharing who's doing what, where, and what works. And that's part of what I think the Future Skills Center is hoping to do with the OCC and others, to try to, you know, as you know, I've been selling iWorks across the province now because I've seen so many other regions that have exactly the same problem that you have in Windsor. So I think there's a massive opportunity for SMEs to take advantage of networks to get the kind of critical mass that those large corporations have that allow them to invest in these sort of large scale upskilling, reskilling, and workforce development kinds of programs. So that was kind of my punchline, but I'm really excited about the potential. And I wonder, JP, can you talk a little bit about how you're leveraging your network to do that sort of thing? Because I know that that you have lots of work underway as well, where you're trying to bring small manufacturers together and help them mutually benefit from collaboration and cooperation.
That's right, Wendy. EMC was founded on collaboration by pulling resources together, networking manufacturers in a room, solving their problem as they're learning from each other, but by sharing and stealing with pride. That's our motto. But really, we're doing it in the skill world, because what we're doing, and we're doing it for onboarding, we're doing it for upskilling and reskilling, where we pull companies together, like whether it's 13, 15, and up to 20 companies that could come now virtually. Before COVID, it was happening online and in person. We're still waiting for an in-person session, which have been postponing since COVID hit. But it's happening. It's happening live. And the minute that we actually saw COVID coming in March last year, we decided, I mean, we were ready. We were ready because of the network that we have in place to do this online. And amazing, remember the shift and people coming in and say, working virtually for manufacturing will not work. Well, surprise, surprise, right in April, we saw first shift supervisors. Think about it, first shift supervisors where they have the base of manufacturing worker reporting to them, working virtually and learning how to interact with technology. So now the barriers are gone, and the way that we're doing it, and that's our recipe, is we just network them into community of practice, and they learn from each other. They learn how to solve problems. They learn how to address new opportunity. They do this in a fashion that is very open, I mean, among themselves in a non-competitive way, and they share the results. And we bring them all together. They talk about their project, and this, you're talking about innovative approach. For us in our world, in manufacturing, we love to fix things and solve problems. And the way we do it is through projects, action-based projects. So that's how, while they're exposed to continuous improvement, coaching, leadership, teamwork, they have to solve a problem or to create a new opportunity, and they share this among themselves. And that's how they do their learning, because the best learning always happens when industry talks to industry. And in this case, small business talk to small business. And that's what we do. We create that environment. Our job is just to facilitate and to watch the magic happen. And that's really in a few words how we do it.
No, I mean, your points about experiential learning and peer-to-peer learning and new models for learning that are not someone standing and talking to someone. It is actually an innovation that COVID has helped facilitate. Simon, sorry, I haven't gone to you for a while, but can you talk a little bit about some of the innovative things you picked up in terms of new approaches to addressing the skills issues in SMEs?
Definitely, and I'm glad we're talking about network, because both in terms of skills, training, upskilling, but also in terms of diversity, networks are so important. Just circling back slightly to diversity, we know that qualified diverse people are there. We just need to get them into the pipeline, because too often what happens is that the trade-off, and from the data we know that there's no trade-off between competencies and diversity. Competent, diverse people are there. So we need to, first of all, train people into realizing that when you have two equally qualified candidates, the final qualifier doesn't have to be the one that you want to play the golf with the most on Sunday, because playing golf shouldn't be qualifier to get a job. So we need to change those mindsets. But also that notion of networks important in terms of pooling resources. We're talking about the fact that oftentimes SMEs don't have as well-funded or developed HR department, if they have one at all. So by involving educational institutions, by bringing different stakeholders, and also even different organizations together to be developing training programs to share and pool resources, that's an innovation that we're not seeing quite enough, and that we should see more. Because oftentimes I think there's people are afraid, and obviously afraid about sharing too much information. But at some point now, we need those SMEs to acquire more skill to find better way of training. And oftentimes, both for questions of times, question of resources, money, and so on, they cannot invest enough themselves. So between pooling resources and sharing resources and not doing it at all, I think it's clear that doing that in a collegial way with different stakeholders will be a lot more effective than staying in your corner and not investing at all, because you just don't have the power to do that. And just in terms of practice, just want to circle back slightly, because I think COVID-19 is so on top of everyone's mind. But one of the things that we are seeing in research now, but not quite enough yet, in terms of skills and how we will have to be using human resources in SMEs, is, most people have or will have experience pandemic-related trauma, whether it being job loss, job insecurity, added stress at work, death or sickness of loved ones, financial insecurities, even just isolation. And even if you're one of the lucky ones who pretty much experience none of those, there is still a psychological pressure of just knowing that there's a pandemic going on. So there will be a need to have more trauma-informed approach to managing employees, to managing organization. And again, by bringing more stakeholders, by bringing government, chamber of commerce, educational institution, different players in the same industry, they will be able to develop better programs and better processes to bring back employees into the organization, but also support them and support employees who might very well still be dealing with stress, anxiety, grief, and trauma. So that will be an innovation that will have to be tackled, because normally when you train manager, you tend not to train them for actually dealing with employees who have been undergoing trauma.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, the broad impacts of mental health issues in the workplace is something that really has come to the forefront. And again, SMEs often don't, they're not equipped to have a full-time psychologist on staff, but it's another area where we can look at shared resources. And I'm going to hand it over to audience questions, but there is one thing I just point that I think we perhaps didn't touch on, and that is the importance of work integrated learning. And the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, along with others, I think EMC has been involved too, is big proponents of the student workplace program, which has primarily supported co-op students. And, one of the things that we've observed, there's huge demand for it, but one of the things that we've observed is with a lot of SMEs, again, they don't have the infrastructure to manage a co-op program, and they don't have the capacity to invest in someone who is not going to stay. And so one of the things that I'm really pushing hard on, and it looks like maybe coming up in this budget, is the idea of using work integrated learning as a transition for people into SMEs. And this could be recent graduates from university. This could be people who are underemployed because they face barriers. This could be newcomers. This could be just about any group that is currently lacking opportunities. Because if you have work integrated learning programs where the employer can decide to keep the trainee, many times they do. And the ADAPT program, which we collaborate with on the OCC, the Advanced Digital and Professional Training Program, it's one of the things that we've observed is, 90% placement rate, and 90% of the employers keep the placement students, whether they're immigrants or recent graduates, because once they try them, they like them. And so again, I think thinking about innovative models and how we can work together to make sure that programs are designed to meet the specific needs of SMEs is part of the reason we're thrilled to work with Rocco. And Rocco, there are lots of questions and comments, so over to you.
Tons. Boy, what a great conversation. And I want you all to get ready because Rakesh is in fact working on a new movie. It's called Digital Nomad Land. It'll follow up. It'll be kind of Nomad Land 2 digitally boosted.
Please come and audition for that.
Yeah, Wendy, you actually with the last discussion answered one of the questions, which was all around, can't SMEs use work integrated learning opportunities to deal with some of these skills gaps? And I think you very well put the case that you sometimes need capacity to build capacity. And then if you're going to spend the time, invest in that training, and then the person gets scooped up by someone down the road that can afford to pay, $5 an hour more, they wonder why make the investment. There are a whole series of questions around digital upskilling. How important is the digital to the SME community? Another one around underrepresented groups and how can they access, what programs are out there. There was a ton put in the budget around kind of taking digital Main Street and putting, $4 billion into digital adaptation, really focused on small, medium-sized businesses. Who wants to comment on that in terms of the opportunities as they're building? JP, why don't you take a crack at it?
Absolutely. And Rocco, in manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, it's at the center of our competitiveness. There's no question, like digital adoption. And I was glad to see it in the budget. But I think there's different levels. Just to dissect this is the ability to be able to find, to manage, to share, to deal with content. And you see it at the first level, just as simple as navigating the internet, using the different device, like managing tablets, managing computers, getting into the software. We're seeing it as simple as managing emails, like managing Zoom, managing Dropbox. Like these are very, very practical skills that are needed. And even the young generation, and I have one in my own house who just went into college, and he couldn't believe it, the number of emails that he had to manage. And that's true also in the workplace. And SMEs are dealing with this because with working from virtually. Now, how you communicate, it cannot be just through Snapchat or through text. Like that has to be formalized too. So sometimes we take this for granted, and some of us will take this for granted. But the basic skills around operating devices and operating software are super hot. And I will say a few words also on Excels and Word and PowerPoints. Like, let's not forget that these are business suites that needs to be mastered in these days in the world. And I could speak to advanced manufacturing, and you get into the coding and how to the cyber security aspect, how to detect a virus, and how to act responsibly with tools as well. So these are the ethics, obviously, of digital skills that needs to be out there in terms of digital training as well.
It's great, JP, and you've struck at a lot of the issues, which is when you talk about digital, it's not necessarily just coding and cybersecurity. It's right down to the use of Excel. So one person's digital skills is another person's, just basic ante. Rakesh, what do you see? Because you deal with so many SMEs through the Windsor Essex Chamber. What are you seeing on the digital side, and how and what programs might businesses and communities access to help along this road?
Yeah, thanks, Rocco. You rightly mentioned that it's not about the more complex programs or tools. It can be as simple as an Excel tool, but clearly there is a need for digital upskilling for sure. Every business, no matter what sector they're in or what their product or service is, most of them will need a point of sale systems. Most of them will need an ordering system. Most of them will need an inventory management system, digital marketing, potentially an e-commerce platform, some kind of an accounting system, cloud-based, CRM tool, maybe potentially again cloud-based. And more, a lot of small and medium-sized businesses are looking into RPA, robotic process automation, because it really takes a lot of repetitive work out, helps them become more effective and efficient. Those are things which, no matter what size of small business or what sector, these are things that are becoming almost a must. And these are not things which, a small and medium business has to have the expertise in. There are vendors, there are providers that can help you in terms of implementation, but it is becoming a must. If you want to really be a viable business and want to continue existing, I think these are some of the tools that will be needed. Now, on top of that, there are other little bit more advanced tools that many businesses are now adopting, AI, machine learning, and data analytics, and the use of that, virtual assistants. Those are some of the things that, I would say a little bit more advanced business or SME should be looking into. But clearly, SMEs, where they are today and going forward from this point, there would be a need for significant amount of upskilling. Doesn't necessarily mean that they have to have the programming skills, but they should be looking into tools that can further augment their offering and services and make them more efficient.
Great. Simon, I'm going to start the next set of questions with you, if I can, because there's a couple of threads in the Q&A around the whole issue of the gig economy and what that's doing to sort of drive wages down in skills. And then the opposite side of that, which, Nadine rightfully asks, very often when a business says it can't find, skilled people, the question is, are they offering enough to actually attract skilled people? And so if you've got this race to build out missing skills and getting skills match, how do you balance the trends towards the gig economy that's trying to get specialized but drive costs down versus competing in the war for talent with more and higher wages? And what do you see in your research in that tension?
Definitely a good question. Well, it goes back to when we discuss management skills, whether it's telework, but whether it's also people being back into organization. It's about building that loyalty by creating a culture that people want to come in, they want to work, they want to be part of the business that you're actually building. When we look at oftentimes what attracts talent to SMEs over large businesses is to be a bigger fish in a smaller pool and have more responsibility, be more connected to what's actually happening. Well, that's the role of managers and senior leaders to actually build that culture of integrating people well and making feel them that they're not just accountable and imputable, but they're also part of the organization and that they're important, which oftentimes seems to be easier to achieve in SMEs because you are smaller. But that we often see in data isn't that easy to create that feeling of belonging. So oftentimes when we see in data, not in this report specifically, but in another one for the Public Policy Forum in the fall, is that oftentimes talented people will be willing to maybe sacrifice some level of pay to actually feel that they do have more autonomy, more meaningfulness in their work, that you can find more in small and medium-sized organizations.
Can you maybe put a link to that report in the Q&A or in the chat if you get a moment? And JP, I'll just turn it over. Same set of issues for you and what your research is indicating.
Interesting, Rocco, there is, when we saw, and we were paralyzed, manufacturing, and I mean, the world was paralyzed when COVID hit, especially in March and April last year, and May, and all that. So there was a huge hit, like hundreds of jobs that left. And what's the coincidence there is the company who had, let's say, issues or not necessarily a good culture, really had a hard time to bring back their workforce. Like you can argue that the government's program was not necessarily helping, but the ones that had a good culture didn't have any issue to bring them back. So there is a lesson here. And I totally agree with Simon. The ones that are mastering or have a culture for talent development, starting with recruitment and the development of their employees and having also proper retention practices internal are now thriving and are now seeing a lot of growth and you can see also with the vacancies, because there's a lot of vacancies in manufacturing. We're back to the numbers that we were in February, and thank God, and I hope it's going to stay and it's going to grow because our demographics are not working in our favor. So, but really going back to having skills at the business agenda, recognizing that that good culture, learning culture, is absolutely essential to function in today's world is the practice that I would say.
Yeah. I mean, the great management consultant, theorist Peter Drucker famously said that, you know, culture eats strategy for lunch. You build a great culture and it reinforces your victories. Rakesh, I want to come back to you on that wage gig, because also, and it's in the Q&A stream, you know, people look at applications like iWork and they say, is that a way to bring people into the work process and as sort of a step onto longer term work? Or is it simply a tool that's going to help to continue to grind cost down because people are just going to pay for very short periods of time and then the workers are gone?
Yeah, Rocco, you know, there are few factors in play here. Number one, I mean, before I directly answer this question, our aging workforce is an influencing factor. You know, the average working age growth is about 0.2% for Canada. The millennials and the number of millennials that are coming into the workforce is almost 50% of the total workforce currently. That is millennials, and you call them Generation Z or Generation Z. So these factors are playing a role, and then on top of that, there is immigration that is happening. And when you have new immigrants come in, they come with their own challenges. Not all of them are able to get into the workforce straight away and find a permanent or a long-term jobs. So these three things need to be kept in mind when you think about gig economy and who's participating in the gig economy. And as I mentioned, you know, there is a significant number of the young workforce, the gig workers, the millennials, the Generation Z, that are brought up with these tools. For them, it is second nature, you know, to go onto a platform, find a gig that is for 4 hours on a particular evening, get it done, move on to the next project, and then to the next project. Through that, they're building their resume. Remember, a lot of newcomers have no experience of working in Canada, and many Canadian employees look for that Canadian experience. How are they going to find that? It's through the gig jobs. They're building their resume, they're building that experience. The new workforce, the millennials, are building their resume through that. So it serves a purpose where you're bringing these people who are adept on technology, who like to work smaller jobs, gig jobs, and contribute, earn, build their resume, and through that now they're able to, you know, to apply for long-term jobs or more permanent jobs. So clearly there is a role for these kind of platforms. And the gig economy is here to stay. There is definitely a concern in terms of whether they're being paid fairly and things like that. But it's just in terms of the uptake, we're just going to see more and more of the gig economy expand.
So you could see in some cases it could be a stepping stone to a larger career in the workforce. In others, depending on age and stage, it could be limited, but it's something that we're going to be watching very, very closely. One last theme, and we do a quick lightning round with the three of you, if I may, because the issue of micro-credentials has come up in most of your conversations, and we also have questions around SMEs leveraging collaborations with higher education institutions. Again, this notion of micro-credentials, and I was just at a press conference this week where the Ontario Minister of Colleges and Universities announced a micro-credential challenge to try to both focus attention on this and provide some quick funding. What do you think the role is of micro-credentialing? How do SMEs get involved in this? I did put a link to the Ontario initiative, but JP, why don't we start with you in terms of what your thoughts are and applications in manufacturing? Huge
role for SMEs. I keep I keep repeating this, micro-credential will be good as the industry recognize it. And that's not a light comment I'm just made. Because right now it's driven by the colleges and the universities, and that's fine. That's fine. I mean, that's part of the agenda. I don't blame them. They're looking for their next set of programs. However, industry needs to be at the table, and that's not a small task. It's not a small task because you have to find the common denominator on, and micro-credential will be based on competencies and not fiction here. Real industry needs competency that are required in today's world, like 2021 and moving forward. So in order to get the attention, not superficially here, but the attention of SMEs and employers, you'll have to hit the bullseyes and to see, okay, that is exactly relevant to my need today. Now, we just completed a survey, 750 firms who are basically saying workplace training programs, not their own programs, but workplace training programs, close to at 80% are not necessarily aligned to their needs. So that's a wake-up call for everybody in the skills development world. We might think some case, and I'm even including myself here at ENC, that we are hitting the bullseyes when it comes to skills development, but there's still a lot of work to do. And so that's why we at ENC are promoting a comprehensive employer needs assessment and going back to employers and making sure that we're looking at competencies, we're looking at occupation, what are the key occupation today, what are the key competency, and what are the competency models, like occupational profiles that we can develop training on. And I think that's the foundation.
JP, I gotta cut you off because where time is short.
Okay,
I want to give 30 seconds each to Simon and Rakesh to finish off
Sorry,
on
Rocco, I
micro
could go on
credentials.
forever on
No,
this
no,
one.
à la prochaine.
Perfect.
Simon.
I'll promise I go fast. So one of the advantages that we're seeing with micro-credential is, first of all, it's removing the discourses from where did you go to school to what can you actually do that's concretely useful for us as an organization. And by the same token, it's also a way to remove some barriers for racialized and diverse people who might have struggled to get their skills recognized. And just to close on that, just building about diversity and inclusion, the Diversity Institute and the Ontario Chamber of Commerce is currently working on developing and implementing easy to use tool that will actually be helping SMEs actually find and recruit more diverse talent and actually try to bridge the skills gaps and the labor shortages.
Last word to you, Rakesh.
Thanks. Extremely important. I can say, from local experience, we've got 3 sectors which has unique requirements: the agribusiness sector, the mold, tool and die sector, and the logistics warehousing sector. Micro credentials for these would immensely help each of these sectors. And I also would like to add here, with the changing times, especially in healthcare system, virtual health is making a huge change, whether that is technicians that need to now learn about, how do they offer their services for a virtual healthcare platform, or whether it's medical office administrators, their role to play. I think for these specific courses, there can be micro-credentials that can be developed that can directly address the changes to the way we would be practicing healthcare.
Right. We could go on for a long time, and we will be doing more with this fabulous set of partners going forward. So look forward to that. This has all been recorded, so share it with your friends. It'll be going up on the website. And I want to hand it over to our amazing partner, Pedro Barada from the Future Skills Center, to close us out today.
Well, right back at you, Rocco. That was great. And on behalf of everyone attending today, I want to thank you. And of course, our great speakers, Wendy and Jean-Pierre and Simon and Rakesh. We heard some great takeaways, both from the survey that you and Wendy and the teams are working on, but also the panelists. And I think JP said it, and he hit the nail on the head as usual. we need to put skills at the top of the business agenda. And you gave us a lot of insights about how to do that. And one of the real takeaways for me out of this is that you showed us real case studies and real examples about how you're building collaborative models and platforms that allow entrepreneurs and SMEs to capitalize on existing tools, emerging tools, skills approaches, resources, capacity building that they're not going to get just on their own. And we're going to need a whole lot more of that, because as you mentioned, Rocco, the federal budget came in big time on some really crucial investments around adoption of digital platforms, focusing on BIPOC-led SMEs, building capacity of SMEs around basic and social and emotional skills. And that's easier said than done in a very big, diverse sector. And I think it's chambers and, of course, organizations like EMC that are exactly positioned as knowledgeable intermediaries that understand the ground game and all of its geographic and sectoral diversity to be able to move fast and quickly and understand what people need. And also, I should say, knowledgeable intermediaries that understand equity needs to be at the center. And chambers certainly showed that with your championing of childcare is absolutely crucial to an inclusive recovery. And we're going to need a whole lot more of that lens, that business case for why it is that we all need to be in it together. So I'm very keen to work with networks like Chambers to build the systems infrastructure, to leverage those public dollars, to keep moving forward and build a roadmap for shared prosperity. And I want to thank you, Rocco, and the Chambers of Commerce, and of course, Dr. Wendy Tsukier at Diversity Institute for leading this. And I look forward to seeing everyone very soon. Thanks, everybody, for being part of this today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.